All right, everyone, welcome back to Rolling Thunder MMA. Today, we're going to be talking about a pretty good fight night card we've got going on this weekend. We've got Strickland versus Hernandez. This is a pretty anticipated fight in the middleweight division with some pretty good fights on the main card as well. Cal, what's your thoughts on how this fight card's shaping up?
Yeah, mate, it's been a highly anticipated one. Looking forward to UFC Fight Night Houston. So far, all the events in Houston have put on absolute bangers. I'm sure you can remember back to when Charles Oliveira won the belt, knocking out Michael Chandler a couple of years ago. But yeah, we're gearing up for it February 21 this weekend. So we've got former champ Sean Strickland against the surging Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, who's arguably going to be the biggest test for Khamzat Chimaev if he can get through Strickland. I'm very excited, mate. I reckon we kick off with what's opening up the main card with the middleweights, Michael Pereira versus Zach Reese. How do you see that one going down?
Look, I think it's going to be a tough fight for Reese. Obviously, he got a good win over McVeigh, who was a surging fighter out of the Contender Series, who's a pretty good jiu-jitsu practitioner, and he actually ended up submitting McVeigh, which I didn't see coming, to be honest. That was a good fight. I remember watching that one back in November last year. Obviously, Michel Pereira is coming off of a pretty bad knockout loss from Kyle Dorcas, which was another upset. He's quite chinny. He's repping 14 losses on his record there. But yeah, I think it's going to be a tough fight for him. Obviously, Pereira's fought Fluffy Hernandez, the main event of this card. He's coming off of two losses. He lost to Magomedov back in April of last year. So he's on a two-fight losing streak, right? And it's not good for him. Surging contenders like Reese, this is the opportunity for him to really cement a name for himself in the middleweight division and start to sort of creep up into those rankings. I think for Reese, he does have really good grappling, and Michel is a very dynamic striker. So it's really a who's who in this fight. It's one of those ones where it's a bit of a coin toss. I think if Zach can get it to the ground, Mikel still is pretty dangerous. We saw that backflip entry he hit in one of his fights. So he's going to be coming out with some crazy stuff. But I'm going to take Zach Reese in this one. I
Mm.
think I think he has the chance to get it done. Mikel is coming off of two losses, and but you can't count him out. At the same time, he's got power, he's got dynamite in his hands, and he doesn't have 31 wins for no reason. But what are your thoughts on this fight?
Yeah, quite similar to yours, actually. I do honestly love watching Michel Pereira fight. He's so exciting. He's got his significant strikes per minute lands at about 4.49 as per the UFC website. And, he's got 14 first round finishes. So, he's going to bring it. He's also a black belt and he's got 9 subs in his career. So, I think it's going to be exciting nonetheless. This fight for me doesn't go to decision, but I do
Mm,
like these up and comers. I hound the point home that once the title shot sort of loses, a fighter loses sight of that after a couple of losses, potentially they get into the back end of their career, like Pereira maybe is. I just think the hunger's not there, and you've got a young guy like Zach Reese coming up. He's coming out of the Contender Series, a couple of wins. He's a brown belt in BJJ. He's still developing his game. He's going to get better every fight. I like him to take Pereira into the deep rounds, probably round three. I'm getting a submission finish. I think he'll get a takedown, and I could see a head and arm, something like that. But you can't
mm,
count Pereira out. As I mentioned before, he hits like a truck,
he
52%
does.
striking accuracy. So he's just firing as much as he can, hoping that he lands, which when he does, people are sleeping. So, I've got, like I said, round three sub from Zach Reese, but don't be surprised if Pereira gets it done early. Just that, veteran style coming out. And if he lands, if he sinks him, he dinks him, as Tai Tuivasa once famously said. But
Absolutely.
yeah, we'll see. We'll move on to the next fight, which is some welterweight prospects. We've got Jacoby Smith versus Josiah Harrell. How do you see that one going?
Yeah, look, to be honest, Josiah Harrell, I'm pretty sure this is his first fight in the UFC. He's currently undefeated. He's 11 and 0, so I haven't seen much of him from the regional scene. There's little to no statistics for him from the UFC. He's 27 years old, so he's still quite young in his career. But 11 and 0 at 27 is quite an impressive record coming off of the regional scene. But taking on Jacobe Smith, who's got wins over Parsons and Nico Price. That was his last win in 2025 back in the end of June. So he's on a two-fight win streak in the UFC. 11-0 as well. So in this one, someone's always got to go. They're representing the exact same record. We've got 8 wins by knockout for Jacobe Smith, 7 of them coming from first round finishes. And Josiah Harrell has 4 submission wins in his career as well, with 3 of them in the first round. So we're looking at 2 dangerous finishes here, and I guess we'll see if Harrell can hang in the UFC. I think that first fight with another prospect is always a big test, even though it is on a fight night. You're under the bright lights. You're on the main card. This is make or break stuff. Are we going to see a Malcolm Wellmaker type entry where he shines under the bright lights? Or, we might see an upsetting first fight in the UFC for him. I think Jacobe Smith, 8 wins by knockout, 7 first round finishes. He's going to push the pace. His significant strike rate is 6.21. And he does have a lot of takedowns as well, averaging 7.42 every 15 minutes. That's quite a high takedown rate. So that this one is going to push the pace. We could see a very, very aggressive fight. And I honestly don't think it's going to make the distance in this one. But I'm going to go with Jacobe Smith in this one. Maybe a late ground and pound finish in round 3.
Very good, very good. Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna have to agree with you. I think Jacob Smith's wrestling, he's a two-time NJCAA national champ and three-time All-American, which we've seen throughout multiple divisions. Those All-American wrestlers, they really are just quite fantastic. And the only ones that really give him a lot of trouble is our, Dagestani Chechen region wrestlers, which have a higher pace, but he's got great striking accuracy, and with 8 KOs, 7 first round finishes, I think he is a threat absolutely everywhere. But I like him tiring out Harrell with his wrestling early. But Harrell's got everything to gain and almost nothing to lose. First fight in the UFC, generally, you're getting at least 2 chances, unless you put on an absolute sleeper, which is terrible and the fans are falling asleep. But yeah, I'd like to see Jacob Smith probably get a late finish as well. I think he'll tire him out. He's got a little bit more experience in the UFC there, using his grappling. He's also got a brown belt in jiu-jitsu, so I don't know if he'll go for a choke or go for the ground and pound option. Probably the latter. I could see a round 2 or round 3 ground and pound once he tires out Smith. But Smith, everything to gain in this one, and looking forward to seeing more of him, getting some more footage of him after this fight. But yeah, does that
Absolutely.
we'll see how we go, but it seems like a prospect war is what I'd be titling this fight. Excited as ever. But mate, back to moving to the top now, up to the heavyweights. We've got Ante Delija versus Serghei Spivac. Ante Delija coming off of a pretty controversial loss to Waldo Costa. There was that eye poke. Do you want to speak more on that? I know you watched that one live, how that went down and how he bounces back.
Yeah, this one was such a controversial fight because I think for Delija, he thought he TKO'd Cortez Acosta. And then when it was replayed, the eye poke obviously got seen and they restarted the fight. So the ref actually did wave it off. And then when it went to the booth, they were saying, no, hang on a minute. We need to start it up again. So I think for Delija, it's hard to switch back on when you think that you've won. So I think that was definitely a tough one for him. The eye poke, obviously being a teammate of Tom Aspinall, was not a good look. And he ended up getting finished by Cortez Acosta in their fight, which obviously propelled him and, is sending Acosta towards that top. Back to Ante Delija, he is a very dangerous heavyweight, like I said, in the camp of Tom Aspinall. Obviously, a very dangerous guy, really good striking, got a good win over Tybura in his first fight in the UFC. And he's coming up against Spivac, who's on a 2-fight losing streak, who did also lose to Cortez Acosta earlier last year. And previous to that, our favorite heavyweight, Jalton Almeida, he also lost to. So the hugging merchant, now the favorite of the PFL. So not really a good look for Spivac. And yeah, he's going to want to have to try and look to come back in a major way, whether he does or not. I'm not so sure in this one. I think I'm going to take Delija by knockout, in all honesty, but you can't count out Spivac's grappling. He's got 8 wins by submission and 11 first round finishes. And with the heavyweights, it's always a coin toss. Spivac is sitting higher in the rankings than Delija. He's going to want to come back in a big way, especially after the fight really did not go his way against Cortez Acosta. So
Mm.
I'm going to take Delija by, I'm going to say round 2 knockout. That's my prediction.
Nice, nice. Yeah, you know what? I think that's a great take there. Tom Aspinall said it himself, the current champ, that he thinks Delisia's got what it takes to get to the very top. And, aside from that eye poke, maybe he would have finished Waldo Acosta had that not have happened, There is obviously that huge eye poking problem that, unfortunately, as we start to break it down, it seems like heavyweight has a lot of eye pokes as well. As we're getting up those weight divisions, they're really opening the fingers out like this. You see your Tom
Mm.
Aspinall, Cyril Gane, it just seems to happen every fight. So hopefully he's taken that out of his game. But yeah, I think he's going to bounce back in a big way. Like I mentioned before, Serghei Spivac is the title shot within reach for him. Obviously, not a very deep heavyweight division, so he's got more chance than perhaps being in some other divisions. But yeah, I don't see it personally happening for him. I think Delisia's got everything to gain in this one once again. Yeah, he's got a couple of noticeable victories and he's moving up. I think he'll overwhelm him in round one, to be honest with you. I just think, he's working out of that Aspinall camp. Obviously, Aspinall not training at the moment, but he's still got some really experienced guys, and he was on an absolute tear prior to that little hiccup in his last fight. So I'm going his speed and his experience in his camp's going to catch him with a first round KO. I don't see Spivak. I see the heavyweight division getting a big shake up in the next sort of
Mm.
year. I think 2026 is going to be hopefully a good thing. And you touched on it before. Breaking news, if you don't already know, Jailton Almeida cut from the UFC. He's not even coming off of he's coming off a split decision loss to Chimaev, which arguably his last two fights, he easily could have been given the win. But it just proves that in this Paramount era, they're not looking for people to hug and stall and get the clock to run out. They're looking for exciting fights. We've seen multiple now, including him, undefeated fighters, as well as, fighters on win streaks that have been cut. So we've seen Basharat get cut. We've seen Fedrakninov. I absolutely butchered that name, but Rinat Fakhretdinov, apologies. He's been cut as well, so any UFC fighters watching this, you better be swinging for the fences because otherwise your contract's on the line, even if you get the win. But yeah,
Absolutely, mate.
and
Yep.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm taking 3 nipple Ante Delija for the win in this fight. I think, yeah, Spivak, he has had a long run in the UFC, and he's lost to Aspinall, he's lost to Cyril Gane, but he has also beaten Derek Lewis. That was a few years ago now, but he does have some good wins. And in heavyweight, like I said, it is always a coin toss because all you need is one somewhat clean shot and you can put these guys out. But I just think the physicality and the strength of Delija, I think it's just going to be too much for Spivak. But yeah, for the heavyweights, hugging isn't enough. You need damage. If
Mm,
Jailton Almeida would have wound up his shots, been heavy, ground and pound, those are the kind of things that people want to see. This is an
mm,
entertainment business at the end of the day. The fans are here to see violence. And if you want to impress the bosses, you want those finish bonuses, you want to make your way to the top, you can't do it by hugging. This is
100%.
not a clinch game. This is not wrestling and it's not jiu-jitsu. And I'd say watching some of the ADCC trials, that's more entertaining than that Almeida fight. I think it's more entertaining than all of his fights. So
Mm.
yeah, have fun in the PFL. I'm sure that Ngannou is waiting for you and he can't wait to knock you out. But let's move on up the card. We've got another good fight. Dan Ige. I love
Mm.
watching Dan Ige fight, taking on Melquizael Costa. Costa coming off a nasty, nasty knockout win back in December on that Carp Royale card. I watched that one live. That was an absolutely dominant win from him. Costa has been on an absolute surge in the UFC. He's only got 2 losses in the UFC, one to Moises and one to Steve Garcia, who's now making his way up the rankings. Not a bad L in hindsight. Dan Ige has gone up in there against some of the best in the world. He's had some very impressive fights, stepping in on extremely short notice to take on Diego Lopez back in 2024. That was an incredible fight. He's gone up against the likes of Bryce Mitchell, Andre Philly, Lerone Murphy, all of these guys who've been, sort of at that top of the division. And Costa is a surging contender. He's got elite grappling. He's really dangerous on the feet. And I think this is going to be the good and right test for him. This is where contenders get made, is that first fight in the top 15 against an experienced vet. Let's put the skills to the test. He's on a very impressive win streak at the moment. He's coming off of, I believe, a 5 or 6 fight win streak in the UFC. So
Yeah,
I think it's
win
the
streak,
time.
yeah.
Yeah, it's the time for him to get into the rankings. And I think that he's going to be a problem for Dan Ige. He's coming off of a loss from Patricio Pitbull, who, he's had I won't say meteoric entry into the UFC. I'd say more mediocre, but at the same time, he did win. He did get a win over Dan Ige in that fight. And Dan's been in the game a long time. Like you said, it reigns true that with these guys, when the title fight and the opportunity at the belt starts to slip, that fire's not there. It's just not, they kind of have to reconsider, what am I fighting for now? And for Ige, you're fighting outside the rankings. I think that fire is not burning as hot as it once was. I'm going to take Costa in this fight. I'm going to see him getting a round 2 finish, and I see it going to a submission. I think he's going to get Ige down, and I think that he's going to work him on the ground, either ground and pound or submission. I'm feeling submission.
Yeah, wow.
I think he's going to lock him up in a rear naked choke. That's my prediction for the fight.
Very good. Very good.
What's your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think you said it best, and we've touched on it a couple of times now. It's really a point that I wanted to hound home in this podcast. But once that fire's gone, you see it with so many fighters. And Dan Ige, for me, it hurts me to say it because, I really thought he'd be that up-and-comer. He's got a record of 19-10, but it's not that long ago that he didn't have those 10 losses. He's fought some short-notice fights, which is a real great company man against, your Diego Lopez when Ortega fell out last minute, weighed in the same day. Granted, he was in camp for that fight, put on a great fight, but he's just not quite able to get over these top contenders. And, I do think he can win this fight. But it's exactly like you said. You got to have that fire. You got to go, look, I'm here and I'm here to stay. I'm not here to be a gatekeeper, because we see it with these gatekeepers. Rob Whittaker's a fantastic example in a heavier weight class where he was the man. As soon as he didn't become the man, you look at his fight against who's Dricus's twin?
Reina Dorita.
Reina Dorita. Sorry, I went blank for a second there. I believe Whittaker should have won that fight. Dorita, whilst he's a weirdo the way that he fights, fantastic fighter, but he's gangly as anything. Rob could have done it, but he probably went, my title hopes are gone. I've lost it to Izzy, been knocked out, been not going to want to fight Pereira at the time, yada yada. Dricus already knocked him out as well. We got Ige here. He's probably not seen it. So I've got Costa's momentum because he's on that winning streak. He's up and coming. Decision, round 3. It's going to be a war. I think Ige's got that dog in him. But I see Costa getting him out by majority decision, outworking him. So it's going to be close. I really do think this one's going to be close. Costa's Muay Thai pressure, mixing in those kicks, and then he's got those subs on the ground. So it could go to finish, like you said. But I think he's gonna hit him with some big strikes. I think there's gonna be a lot of blood in this one, and I'm excited.
Absolutely.
Let's move on to Carlos Prates' son, Geoff Neal, versus Uroš Medić in the welterweight division.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is an interesting fight. Obviously Geoff Neal is coming off of a devastating KO loss. He's not been active in recent history. His last win was over Dos Anjos back in 2024. So it's been a while since he's been in the win column. And Uroš Medić, man, what a beast. He had that absolute war with Oralby back in 2023. That was an incredible fight. He's put on some absolutely incredible performance. He has had a couple losses in the UFC, but he's also had some great fights, some great performances, and he's looking to break into the rankings as well. We've got another surging contender, 10 wins by knockout, 9 first-round finishes. This guy is an absolute dog, and he's riding a 2-fight win streak at the moment. He was quite active, fought 3 times back in 2025. This is the definition of a surging contender. He's active, he's taking fights, and he's trying to break into that top 15. Geoff Neal, I think he is sort of coming to the tail end of his career. Obviously, he was taking L's from the likes of Shavkat Rakhmonov, from Ian Gary, guys who were at the top now of the division. And I think Neal has been a bit of a gatekeeper as well, similar to Dan Ige in that sense. But I think Uroš Medić, I think he's going to get this one done. He's riding 2 KO wins. And that chin of Neal definitely got compromised by that spinning walk-off elbow knockout by Prates, which was just an absolute thing of beauty. So I'm going to take Uroš Medić getting this one done in round 2. I think that Neal does have good pressure. He's a pretty decent boxer by the UFC standards, and he did give Prates a decent run for his money in round 1. So I think if Medić can weather the storm and find his range and find his combinations, I think that he'll have success on the feet. And I think that he can get this one done against Prates Jr.
Yeah, mate. Well, I've got an alternate take to that. As much as I've just complained about dudes not seeing the title and being gatekeepers, etc., etc., when it comes to Geoff Neal, I don't know what it is. Look, he got knocked out by Prates in his last fight. His performance against Ian Gary, I thought was fantastic. Until he got choked by Shavkat, I thought he was doing very well against, some really top flight contenders. Obviously, Shavkat now removed from the rankings due to injury, and Ian Gary potentially getting a title shot against our current welterweight champ, Islam Makhachev. So I've actually got a really good fight here. I think Uros exciting, welterweight, up and coming, bounce back. But I think Neal's experience is going to edge this one by decision. So I think it's going to be split decision potentially, but I
Okay.
think the judges aren't very favourable to Geoff Neal. So if he does lose it and it is a decision, I'll feel for him. But he's got really good boxing, good counter wrestling, and I could actually see him getting this one done because he has fought that top flight competition. He's coming off a bad loss with a KO to Prates, but Prates has knocked out everyone except Dean Gary. We've seen that. Look at Leon Edwards, his other son. So, if he gets a win here, maybe his dad will take him out for a nice Brazilian barbecue, but we'll see how we go. But yeah, I'm going with Geoff Neal. But mate,
Okay.
I reckon we're going to move on to what the people have come here to see. We're here to see Sean Strickland versus Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, two middleweight contenders. Former champion Strickland there, 29-7 is his record. He's won 4 of his last 6. And then, yeah, he lost to Duplessis twice in his last 2. So, yeah, how do you see this one going down, mate? I know you've been excited about it for months.
Yeah.
Tell me how you feel about this one.
Look, mate, I love the Sean Strickland. I think that he is one of the most entertaining guys in the business. There is absolutely no denying that. And, his game is particularly around keeping it on the feet. He jabs and teeps and makes it a quote unquote war. I do enjoy Sean Strickland, but Anthony Hernandez is, I think, the dark horse of the middleweight division. His wins in the UFC have been absolutely phenomenal. I was watching some tape on him earlier today, and his grappling is not to be trifled with. He takes these guys into deep waters. He's got a few wins in the 3rd round, and he hasn't lost in a very, very long time. I think his last L might have been to Kevin Holland back in 2020.
I
So
think you're
he's
correct.
coming off of a very impressive win streak, the likes of Marc-Andre Barrieux, Roman Kopylov, Michel Pereira, and he also beat Brendan Allen, who got an impressive win over Reiner de Ritter.
And he
And
absolutely ragged old Delete. I'm sure you'd know
that
about that
that win
one.
over Roman Dolidze, I picked that one so wrong back in the day, back in August last year. Fluffy really, really impressed me. His jiu-jitsu is crisp. And, he has been stung in certain moments, and he comes out of that fire swinging, in some of his performance, losing the 1st round, but he makes adjustments. This guy can adapt in the fire. And I think in a 5-round fight, that is really going to favor him. Sean Strickland, he's a guy that has that dog in him, and he bites down on the mouth guard and goes. Got his nose broken against Dricus, was a bit compromised in that 2nd fight, but he still bit down and went for it. But at the same time, sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes you can't just bite down. sometimes you need to adjust, and that wins fights.
Yep.
I think for Fluffy, he is dangerous on the feet as well. He only has a few knockouts in his career, but his
Mm.
game is on the ground. So I think if he can get into some form of clinch situation with Strickland, which is not something that he typically likes, but he needs to cross that void, get him up against the cage, and work him to the ground. I think that's
Mm.
where Fluffy will do his best work. And honestly, Sean Strickland is not the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu connoisseur. So I can see Hernandez, taking him to deep waters on the ground. I think that this one will go into the later rounds because
Mm.
Strickland is really good at keeping that distance and he's good at fighting at his pace and fighting his fight. But he does get caught. He does get caught on the feet. And Fluffy has found success in those moments where when he catches you, he's not hunting for a TKO. He's going to hunt to try and get you down and take you into his world, which is the grappling. And I think
Mm.
that's where he's going to exceed in this fight. I see Fluffy getting it done. Maybe a decision, but I don't see it going that far. I think he's going to get him down. I think round 4, he gets it done by a submission.
Nice, nice. I like your
What's your
take.
take?
I like your take. Look, mate, I've been so excited for this one for the longest time. I think whoever wins this fight has got to be next for Khamzat Chimaev because whilst Dricus du Plessis wants that rematch, you don't get ragdolled for 5 rounds like that, where it's that dominant, one of the most dominant title fights decisions that we've ever seen amongst all divisions, and you get an immediate rematch. Sorry, buddy, you go and prove yourself and you come back. Nothing,
Absolutely.
not saying you can't get a rematch. I think he can beat Khamzat if he fixes that hole, but it's a big hole to fix. So look, what do I want to happen? I want Anthony Fluffy Hernandez to win. His keys to victory, his pace is so high. That's part of the reason that I want to see him get this win because if anyone can match Chimaev's crazy pace, it's this guy. His cardio is Mexican and he is a machine. He's got those wins over Delide, Brendan Allen, like you mentioned, TKO'd Michel Pereira. Yeah, he's a black belt, and I've watched this guy for years, and I always remember thinking. I remember a couple of years ago he choked out Kopilov, and I thought,
Mm,
who is this guy? I think he might have been ranked maybe outside the top 10 or just maybe ninth back then, and I thought this guy's going to be getting to the top of the division soon. Here we are, a couple of years later. It's taken a lot longer than I thought it would, but yeah, I think, like we just mentioned, he's hungry. He's never touched gold. Strickland's touched gold, and he never thought he was going to. So, it's exciting. I've got him taking it by fifth round decision. So yeah, but if Strickland, both guys can get wins out of this. Strickland's been talking a big game. He says, "I'm the only American that can out wrestle Hamzat and know how to get up." Well, buddy, you got taken down by Dricus. Look what Dricus just got absolutely humiliated in front of the world by Hamzat. Hamzat made him his bitch. As much as I love Dricus, he's one of my favorite fighters. He had nothing and he took you down. So I don't believe a word that Sean Strickland's saying in that lane. Prove me wrong. But yeah, I've got Fluffy round 5 decision, and we're on to bigger and better things. But yeah, I reckon we'll wrap it up there. We'll have an episode soon. We've got some inside takes in the next episode regarding the White House, and we actually caught up with a couple of UFC fighters the other week at the Street X meetup. So we'll see you in the next episode.
absolutely. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next one.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.